Hi, my name is Rita Thompson, and I am the current president of Friends of Historic Jekyll Island. Thank you for joining us today. We're glad to bring this presentation to you, and I am pleased that, moving forward, you're going to have the option of attending our monthly programs online or joining us for a live presentation at the Mosaic Museum here on Jekyll Island. We're thrilled to have Bonnie Householder kick off this season's programs for FOGI. Bonnie and her husband Dan have been coming to Jekyll Island for 50 years and have been living here since they retired almost 10 years ago. As a hobby upon retirement, Bonnie became interested in researching her own family history. Since then, she has become an avid genealogist. Bonnie has researched several of the families that made their homes here on Jekyll Island during the Millionaires era. Her work on the Maurice family will mark her fourth presentation to FOGI programs. We are fortunate that she's willing to speak to us again this year. Her research is incredibly thorough. She always leaves us with fascinating facts about past families of Jekyll Island. Listen to Bonnie present her research on the Maurice family and the Hollybourne Cottage. She will not disappoint you. Finally, if you are not a current member, we would love to have you join us. Go online to Friends of Historic Jekyll Island, tap on the menu bar, tap again on membership for easy instructions on how you can join our not-for-profit organization and help support the preservation of beautiful Jekyll Island.
If you've not already seen the inside of Hollybourne, this wonderful family home, photos will be provided here, and perhaps this will entice you to go on the next tour to meet the man who designed the home and meet his family. Charles Stewart Maurice was born in June of 1840. Stewart, as he was known in his family and as he will be known this evening, was the son of Charles Fraser Maurice. His father was an 1834 graduate of what was later known as Princeton University in a graduating class of 37. 4 years after graduation, he married Cornelia Jolene, and they moved to a small town called Sing Sing, now Ossining, which I'll mispronounce for you, where Fraser opened a private school for boys. Later that year, the school merged with Mount Pleasant Academy, which Stewart later attended. Stewart entered Williams College in Williamstown, Massachusetts, as a sophomore in 1858. He graduated as 1861 class salutatorian and a member of Phi Beta Kappa. 1861 also, of course, brought the beginning of the U.S. Civil War. Stewart wanted to serve in the Navy, but he also wanted to learn engineering. So shortly after his college graduation from Williams College, he enrolled at Rensselaer Polytech Institute. Stewart graduated from RPI and was commissioned third assistant engineer a year later. Precisely what his naval responsibility included in the Civil War is unclear, but we have photos of the ships on which he served. His first assignment was the U.S. Ossipee, which was then stationed in the Washington Naval Yard. The Ossipee was a wooden sloop of war in the Union Navy during the American Civil War. The next slide will show you Maurice's next assignments. The gunboat Agawam. He served on the steam frigate Colorado, and Malvern, the flagship of the North Atlantic Squadron. Stewart is shown here in his naval uniform, and next to him a photo of Charlotte, his wife, at about the same time. Now, Stewart's naval service ended in December 1865. Let's move on to his work life, Kellogg and Maurice. Bridges were one of the most important examples of industrial design in the 19th century. Until the expansion of the railroads and the introduction of trusses in the early 1840s, timber bridges were constructed by traveling master builders who also erected factories and mills. Most, if not all, of the material was obtained close to the site, and the fabrication was done there. The men who erected bridges that linked American communities have remained largely unknown. Stuart Maurice was one of the most successful of the bridge builders within the Jekyll Island Club, but there were others whom we will talk about later. In 1880, he joined forces with his partner Charles Kellogg to start Kellogg and Maurice Bridge Builders. To understand what the bridge builders accomplished, we have some photos of bridges they built more than a century ago, which are still standing and still in use, albeit with a different reason today. I won't bore you with all the details of the individual bridges that Maurice is credited with building. However, here are a few still standing in chronological order. The Aurora Lawrenceburg Trail, or Tanner's Creek Bridge, was built by Kellogg and Maurice in 1882. It is still in use. However, it has transferred from a rail line to being a trail required making changes. An organization, Rails to Trails, created a niche to repurpose bridges which are now in use for bicycling or walking trails. A side note here, just for a second, the Tioga Historical Society in Athens, Pennsylvania, where the Maurices lived when they weren't here, has several collections in their archives, and one of the first, is the Kellogg and Maurice sign shown here. This close-up of Aurora Lawrenceburg Trail shows you the bridge building techniques of the time. This bridge was a railway bridge until 1915. A New York Central line ran through Lawrenceburg and is now a pedestrian bridge on the Aurora Lawrenceburg Trail. The first Wabash Bridge construction by a group of bridge builders, including Kellogg and Maurice Bridge Works. Between 1880 and 1884, virtually the entire superstructure was replaced and upgraded. In 1884, the steamboat Montana crashed into the railroad bridge. Following the wreck, the piers stood, but the railroad trestle had to be replaced. In 1936, the old bridge was replaced with a new bridge a half-mile downstream. I love the photo here of the locals sitting in the grass as if they expect the bridge to just reinvent itself. Oops. County Bridge number 36 was built by Kellogg and Maurice in 1907 in Portland, Pennsylvania. This bridge over a township road to Jacoby Creek was photographed in 1981 for the Register of Historic Places, where the concrete arch bridge is listed. At roughly the same time, Kellogg and Maurice formed their partnership. Another Jekyll Island Club member, Thomas Clark, began his own similar company called Clark Reeves and Company. Kellogg and Maurice worked together until 1884, when they joined with the Central Bridge Company in Buffalo. Another Jekyll Island Club member and engineer, Edmund Hayes, had joined a friend who was a bridge builder, and they incorporated their company as Central Bridge Company. Then in 1884, Union Bridge Company was formed by a combination of several other bridges. And Edmund Hayes, Stuart Maurice, and Thomas Clark were part owners with offices in New York City. In 1900, the Union Bridge Company was sold to American Bridge Company with the merger of Kellogg and Maurice and the Central Bridge Company. Jekyll Island Club members involved were Stuart Maurice, George S. Field, Edmund Hayes, and Charles S. McDonald. In 1886, Charles Stuart Maurice was one of the founding fathers of the Jekyll Island Club. Members were allowed to purchase 2 shares, and Stuart sold one to his boyhood friend, Albert E. Tuzelen, after whom his son was named. In the same year, he also brought in 2 partners, Thomas Curtis Clark, whom you just heard about, and Edmund Hayes, whom you just heard about, and George Spencer Field, all bridge builders you've met in the previous slide, to become Jekyll Island Club members. Now that you know a lot about bridges, let's talk about building a home on Jekyll, namely Hollybourne. This 11,000-plus square foot home began construction in December 1890 and is among the earliest private homes constructed as part of the historic Jekyll Club. By 1892, 6 private cottages, including Hollybourne, were listed on the Glynn County tax rolls. Hollybourne and Baker, which later burned down, were valued twice as high as the others. These first few slides are from the Millionaires era. The first 3 are from the late 1800s, and these photos are from the University of North Carolina archives. The house was one of the first 2 private homes on Jekyll Island, and construction was completed at a cost of $19,100. In the first slide, several women are sitting or standing in the front yard. No doubt they are Maurice family members, but there's no identification. The next slide is one of the house, which includes the side that includes the porch that Foji has just recently updated and recommissioned. Note on the third photo the privet hedge lining the driveway and the trees. This photo is also from the UNC archives, but note it has a caption on it that says C.S. Maurice Residence, Jekyll, misspelled, Island Club. If you look carefully in the next one, you can see Charlie Hill waiting patiently for the family to come down for the afternoon carriage ride around Jekyll. The next slide is current, but the point of that one is the step in the middle. That's how the Maurice children got into the carriage. Now on to some interior photos. The first photo is also from the UNC archives, and apologies because it's very difficult to see. It was taken while the Maurice family were living there, and you can tell it's the parlor. The next few slides will include some first floor shots that were before and after. Most demonstrate the work that our volunteers have accomplished. First is the entrance hall looking into the parlor before and after, also known as the drawing room. The next slide has photos from May 2015 showing the lath and plaster in the ceiling and a section of the window on the first floor. The photos are to show that the work has been done, and the ultimate plan, I believe, is to leave it as is so that visitors to the house can see how the work is being done. Moving on to the second floor bathroom, the before shot is awful, and I'm being kind. The after shot is just completely different. The second floor landing before, note the ceiling. No one was allowed to go upstairs at that time because they were afraid that someone would fall down and get hurt. 2 years later, the seating nook is redone, and visitors could go through some of the bedrooms on the second floor. The second floor bedroom, what a difference 2 years makes. In the first, the plaster's falling off, there are holes in the floor, and it was roped off so no one could be in there. In the second slide, it's a world of difference. Again, the volunteers have been busy replacing old boards, and note the small bookcase above the seating area right inside the front door of the house. The front door with leaded glass and the edging detail is a photo that I took in May 2015. The next one is the detail of the wood around the fireplace. Looks like it's brand new, doesn't it? And the first floor pocket doors. What a wonderful example of funding from Foji. Thank you, Foji. This next one is a photo from an article about Hollybourne. The reporter said, and I quote, Charles Maurice, the home's original owner, told his architect William Day that he wanted wide open rooms without the use of support columns. The architect didn't think it could be done, but Mr. Maurice, an engineer, used bridge building techniques in the home's construction. As a result, the home has large, airy rooms with plenty of space which the Maurices used for daily living as well as entertaining. The trusses are anchored from the roof line to the second floor ceiling to hold up the second and third floors. This is one of his ideas as a bridge builder that came through strongly. Another nod to bridge building in the basement are concrete pilings holding up the first floor. The home's 4 stories include an attic, and the only basement in the club's original cottages to this day, not to require pumps for basement water removal. It includes the truss system that Maurice designed to connect the second and third floors. If you've not yet had the opportunity to go on the tour of Hollybourne, I encourage you to do so. It's a separate tour, and the Hollybourne portion takes about 40 minutes. Several people I knew who knew that I was going to talk about Hollybourne and the family asked me to include information on the family members. So onward to the family. You may have seen these photos of Charles Stewart Maurice and his wife, Charlotte Marshall Holbrook Maurice. Both of the photos are taken from Find a Grave, and the photos were added by someone named Anonymous. When not living on Jekyll Island, the Maurice family lived in Athens, Pennsylvania, as you can see on this map. Athens is just a stone's throw from the state of New York. The next slide is a photo of what their Athens, Pennsylvania home looks like today. I'm pretty sure it doesn't look like it did when they were there because they didn't have an air conditioning unit in the front window. Obviously, the home has been updated in the past 100 plus years, but it is part of the National Historic District in Tioga County. The family of 9 children, parents, and 2 servants all lived here. Although Hollybourne is one of the largest homes on Jekyll Island, the family had a tiny beach home with their regular home on the east side of Jekyll Island. This photo shows some of the children enjoying the beach. The family included 9 children as shown on this list. Charlotte died at 26 days old, 3 never married, and all 3 of those lived at home with their parents forever. The Maurice family plot is in the Tioga Point Cemetery. Stuart and Charlotte's headstones are right by the monument. Most of the family members are interred in Tioga Point, with a few exceptions of the children who no longer lived in Athens, Pennsylvania. Charlotte was ill when they were in Jekyll Island in the winter of 1909. Her doctor noted she was ill for several months, and there were many people who contracted typhoid. At the age of 64, Charlotte died at home in Athens, Pennsylvania, in September 1909 from typhoid. If any good could come from her illness prior to the next season, the club engaged a bacteriologist to determine the source of the Jekyll Island typhoid fever. He recommended better sewage disposal, window screens, correct and prompt destruction of garbage, and better cooling and storing of milk from the Jekyll Island dairy. However, no action was taken by the club executive committee. In 1912, 6 more members were stricken, and the club again engaged experts. Their expert reported the disease spread through oyster beds to 2 near sewage disposal areas. He agreed with previous doctors that JI sewage disposal was totally inadequate and unsanitary. This time, a firm was employed to install a new system, and the situation was finally resolved at the end of the 1913 season. Now let's move on to a little family time in a little happier surroundings. In 1911, 2 Maurice family weddings took place, and the newlyweds honeymooned on Jekyll Island. On the left are Charles Whitney Dahl, who married Emily Marshall Maurice in December 1911. Whitney and Emily were among the first and perhaps only weddings for children of Jekyll Island Club members in Faith Chapel. Next to Whitney and Emily are Eleanor Fowler and Albert Tuzalin Maurice. Albert went by Al or Tuz by friends and family. The right side photo in that series is of Emily, Stuart, and Eleanor. Charles Stewart Maurice was the head of the family together with his Charlotte. She predeceased Stewart by several years. Stewart died in 1924 of bronchopneumonia and the resulting disability that caused his death. In October that year, Charles Stewart Maurice's estate directed all real estate to be held in common by the heirs, but the club share could only be in one name, so it was put in Peg's name. You'll hear her name again. Archibald, Emily, Mamie, and Nina all agreed to share equally in dues and member assessments. The executors sold the family house in Athens to Margaret, Arch, Emily, Marion, and Cornelia for the sum of $5,245. Archibald Stewart Maurice was the eldest son, born in 1870. Following in his father's footsteps, he was a civil engineer, but he retired early. Arch was the one son who lived at home all his life. In 1927, he traveled to France, the UK, and Scotland, and his occupation on his passport was golfer. A year later, in 1928, he was involved in an automobile accident and died the next day, and he's buried in Tioga Point Cemetery. George Holbrook Maurice married Ethel Eglin in 1892. Together, they had 3 children, and in the 1930 census, he was shown as a civil engineer and farmer. His family lived in Durham, North Carolina, and George lived to be 88. The Maurice sisters are on the next slide. Marion is the one on the far left, then Emily, then Margaret or Peg, and then Cornelia. The names of Miriam, Mamie, and Margaret Peg may ring a bell for you later. Marion Bridge Maurice, Mamie to her siblings, never married and lived at home in Athens, Pennsylvania. Her middle name, Bridge, was a family name on her mother's side, had nothing to do with her father's occupation. Mamie was the niece of Horatio Bridge, her mother's uncle. Following her mother's death, Mamie was executor of the Bridge family papers, and in the papers was a note that the collection of Nathaniel Hawthorne's letters would eventually be given to Bowdoin College. That's important because Horatio, Nathaniel, and Walt Whitman all graduated at the same time and remained lifetime friends. The college, Bowdoin College, received the collection in 1976, and just so that we're all in the same yard, Frank Goodyear Jr. is now the curator of the Bowdoin Art Museum. The advent of steamships in the 19th century enabled faster, safer, and more reliable transatlantic crossings. If you can imagine, in the time of the late 1800s, Mamie and her sister Peg traveled extensively. At a time when women rarely traveled alone, the two of them went together all by themselves to Genoa, Italy twice, Cherbourg, France twice, Liverpool, England, Southampton, England, and Nassau in the Bahamas. Marion lived to be 83 years old, and you'll hear more about Peg and Mamie's activities shortly. Charles Fraser Maurice rarely came to Jekyll. He really didn't particularly care for Jekyll Island. He graduated from Lehigh University in 1896. In the 1930 census, he was shown as a designing civil engineer, but he was more than that. Charles designed and built the foundation for the New York Yankee Stadium. He married Emily Cook Wilkinson in 1904, and they had one son, Charles Jr., who never married and lived at home. Cornelia, or Nina, Maurice married Robert Wilkinson, the brother of Emily Cook Wilkinson Maurice. He was born in Poughkeepsie, New York, and was an attorney. In 1918, in World War I, Robert went to France to do Red Cross work. At the same time, another Jekyll Island Club member, Cornelius Bliss, was on the same Red Cross War Committee. Nina and Robert had 2 children. Marion M. Wilkinson was a graduate of the class of 1924 from Vassar College and never married. And her brother, Robert Wilkinson Jr., married Dorothy. They had 2 children, and Robert became a retail lumber executive. Now on to Margaret Stuart Maurice, or known to her family and friends as Peg. She never married, lived at home with her parents and her sister Marion. There were many stories told about Peg, but the most colorful stories included her sister Mamie. In 1942, the club opened as usual for the season, but with World War II looming large, the decision was made to close due to problems in transportation, fuel, etc. All the cottages were shuttered and did not reopen until after the war. The state did everything in its power in 1947 to purchase Jekyll Island, but the then governor was leaving office. To make a smooth transition, the state decided to proceed by condemnation or otherwise to acquire the island, and they offered to pay $750,000 to $800,000. The sisters, Mamie and Peg, were not happy, and they attempted to block the state's action. When they eventually realized the state would take their home of 6+ decades, the legal battle ensued in the Glynn County Courthouse. The other homeowners received only $10,000 to $15,000. Finally, the state agreed to give the Maurice sisters $20,000 for Hollybourne just to resolve the conflict. They were told they could not stay on Jekyll in their beloved Hollybourne. No electric, no water facilities were available, and convicts were on the island working on roads and structures. They spent nights on Sea Island and went back and forth daily on the Sea Island launch with a box lunch until they packed up all their entire home and belongings. The sisters were so upset about the loss of their home, they never returned to Georgia, and when they were forced to leave Hollybourne, they found a home in Florida. To get from Pennsylvania to Florida, however, they went through Alabama to avoid going through Georgia. After the sisters had become world travelers, it probably was very difficult when Mamie died, leaving Peg as the only one left. In September 1958, Peg fell and broke her hip. She never fully recovered and died Christmas Day 1958 at the age of 76. Albert Tuzelin Maurice was named after Stuart Maurice's best friend. You may remember he's the one that he shared the membership to the club with. The man graduated from Princeton in the class of 1907 and Columbia Law School in 1908. He married Eleanor Fowler in 1911, and they had 2 sons, Albert Tuzelin Jr., born in 1913, and Thomas Fowler Maurice, born in 1916. Albert Tuzelin Maurice Jr. was a graduate of Princeton. He married a woman by the name of Jill Taylor in July 1936, and they had 1 son. Thomas Fowler Maurice was born in 1916 and married Marion Durand. They had 4 children. One of his grandchildren will be mentioned in just a bit. Tom and Marion, his wife, donated the funds to Princeton and the University of South Carolina, Aiken, for fine arts scholarships, and Tom donated funds to the city of Aiken, South Carolina, for a city park. Tom was well respected, and after his death in 1994, his classmates established the Thomas F. Maurice Class of 1939 Memorial Scholarship for a Princeton scholarship. Now let's back up just a minute and go back to Albert, Thomas's older brother. In 1923, Al and his father had a falling out due to Al's relationship with Mrs. Lewis. Stuart put a codicil in his will and disinherited his son, Al. Al and his wife Eleanor then spent a month on Jekyll that February for recovery. Al sent word to his father that he wanted to see them, but he was unaware that his father was very ill in Pennsylvania. Al wrote to say he would leave the next day to come to PA, but Stuart died 3 days later before Al could get there. His father had not changed the codicil in his will, dated the 26th of December 1923, disinheriting Al. After the death of his father, Albert discontinued his situation, ultimately stopping seeing Mrs. Lewis, moved his family to Aiken, South Carolina, became president of Southeastern Clay Company, and was welcomed back into the family. In February 1930, Al returned to Hollybourne with Marion and Peg to celebrate his birthday, and 1 year and 15 days later he died suddenly of a heart attack. Emily Marshall Maurice Dahl, the youngest of the Maurice children, was born in 1887, and about the age of 14, she was practicing her French lessons by writing them on the wall of the third floor of Hollybourne. Here's a photo of that lesson in case you would like to look for it in your next Hollybourne tour. And the translation is in yellow next to her homework, thanks to my daughter. Emily was one of the few girls in the family to attend college, and she graduated from Bryn Mawr College, no doubt spurred on by her French lessons. Emily married Charles Whitney Dahl in Faith Chapel, and their marriage license reflects the Glynn County location. Whitney was a graduate of Harvard in 1905. They were married, and he went into the military during World War I and eventually became a lieutenant colonel. They had 3 children, and the firstborn was Charles Whitney Dahl, Jr. This is notable because he was one of the only children of club members baptized in Faith Chapel. An article in the local paper celebrated his baptism. When he grew up, he followed in his father's footsteps, also becoming a military officer. Emily, Whitney, as well as their son and daughter-in-law, are all interred at Arlington National Cemetery. Now, when a friend asked if I had information on any current Maurice family members, this last slide was just the perfect ending. In June 2017, the Foji volunteers were scurrying around to be sure every inch of Hollybourne was perfect. They had just completed rebuilding the side porch, which was identical to the one the Maurice family had, but there was an even bigger event. Thomas Maurice, you remember him? He was Albert's younger brother. Thomas Maurice was the grandfather of the bride in this family. Photo. Walking out on the front porch of Hollybourne with her parents on either side. The wedding photographer captured the day, and the view from their back was wonderful to see as they were wed in front of family and friends on the front steps of Hollybourne. Okay, this brings it all together with a beautiful and happy ending. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for your interest in Foji, the Maurice family, and in Hollybourne. This last slide is acknowledgments of people and organizations which helped create this presentation. Thank you, and if you have any questions, I suggest that you reach out to Rita Thompson, who will be able to get the questions to me, or she'll answer them herself. Thank you very much.